Island. I'm your host, Zach Harkness, and today I'm joined by the number 12 bantamweight contender in the UFC, Cody the Spartan Stamann. How are you doing today?
I'm great, man. How are you?
I'm very good. Thanks for asking. So let's get into the first question here. Now, as some people may know, you actually have more than one nickname in MMA. Those two nicknames being the Spartan and Mr. Wonderful. Now, how did each nickname, get created, and which one do you prefer to use?
I prefer the Spartan. Mr. Wonderful was kind of started as a joke. It was like a joke. One of my coaches wrote it down on a fight card as a joke, and then it somehow made its way online. I don't claim that name at all. The Spartan is because of where I'm from. I grew up in a town called Sparta, so and growing up we were obviously the Spartans. So that's where that nickname came from.
All right. Well, so second question here. At Knockout Promotions 55, you would stop Zach Church in the second round. Now, this would be your 7th straight win and your last fight before joining the UFC. Before this fight and before the actual call came, how close did you think you were to a UFC contract, and were you surprised at all when the call came?
No, I wasn't at all surprised the call came. I knew for a while that I'd been on their radar. I had a couple offers before that, actually, that just didn't pan out. They went with someone else. With my record and who I was beating, I knew it was just a matter of time before I got the call. And actually, when I got the call, I was injured, but obviously you don't ever say no to the UFC. So I just stepped in on a week's notice and got the job done.
So, like you said, the UFC actually offered you multiple contracts before. Can you say who those fights were against and who ended up getting them?
I'm not even actually sure. Who. I think one of them was Jimmy Rivera. He needed like a last minute replacement, and that was probably 6 months before I got signed. And that fight, I'm not sure who got the opportunity. And there was one other one. And it was also another like really, really tough guy. And honestly, I don't remember it because it kind of happened and went in the same day. It was like, hey, could you fight in a week? And I'm like, yeah, I could. And then they found someone else on the roster that could do it instead of me.
So they just fell through because the UFC just decided to move on? There was no reasons from your end or anything?
No. I was 100% willing. It was just the UFC, normally when they get replacement fights, it's easier for them, instead of signing a new guy, for them to use someone that's already on the roster. So.
All right. Well, like many other successful MMA fighters, you come from a wrestling background. How long did it take to truly adjust your wrestling skills to adapt to your fully evolved MMA game plan?
A long time, a really, really long time. Yeah, I had a wrestling background. I wasn't necessarily a great wrestler. I don't have a great wrestling pedigree. And I really learned how to wrestle when I started doing MMA. I mean, I learned how to wrestle for MMA, and I excel at that. I'm really, really, really good MMA wrestler. So a lot of my wrestling game was super applicable to fights, and it comes out naturally. It's never really something that I intended on being as an athlete. I never said, yeah, I'm going to be a wrestler. I'm going to take guys down. I'm going to beat them up on the ground. I never really saw myself as that. I saw myself as more of a stand-up guy. I prefer to look for stand-up, but wrestling has just always come easy to me. I'm pretty physical. I'm stronger than most guys I fight. So, there's always a lot of opportunities for me to take guys down. And I have a really, really good double leg, and it's gotten me a long ways.
So earlier in your career, you said you didn't really consider yourself a wrestler. How long did it take until you really considered yourself, you became the very good MMA wrestler that you are today?
The wrestling happened really, really fast. The wrestling was natural. I had so many wrestling matches and so much competitive experience in wrestling that it just naturally came out in fights. So, I mean, right off the bat, I was taking guys down. It took a while. I'd boxed as well before I started MMA. It took a while for me to develop the kicks and the hands and the distance and all the other things and the jiu-jitsu, all the other things that come with being an MMA fighter. That took me a little longer. Honestly, I still to this day, I still lean on my basic wrestling skills a lot, because there are so many dangerous guys, and if you can control a takedown, especially at my division, you can win a lot of fights that way. I mean, you see, the most dominant athletes in MMA are guys that can wrestle and that, have a wrestling background and use that wrestling in fights.
So early on in your career, did you kind of depend on having a takedown and wrestling advantage on your opponents?
Oh, absolutely.
Did you kind of bank on that?
Still to this day, everybody, that's kind of how people refer to me as, but no, I'm a Golden Glove state champion. Like, I have good hands, I can kick. There's a lot of other stuff I can do, but I haven't really had the opportunity and the right matchups to kind of show those skills. Maybe a little bit in like the Caraway fight and some of the other fights where, I fought guys that was a lot better on my feet than. But hey, I'm here to win and make money. So if double legging guys gets me paid, I'll double leg everybody.
Right. Now, in a very highly publicized fight, you took on prospect Song Yadong, and in the fight, he had a point deducted, but the fight went to a draw when many people thought that you had won. From your perspective, can you run us through the closing moments of the fight to the moment the decision was read?
I felt like I won every round. I definitely felt like I almost finished him. If I had another 15, 20 seconds, I would have finished him in that third round. I didn't know how much time was left. I just saw him kind of starting to break. I knew that he wanted out. He wanted to be out of that fight because I was controlling him so much on the ground. And then, when the decision was read, I thought it had been just an obvious mistake, that maybe the wrong person got the point taken and everything would be squared away by the time I got to the locker room. But then it wasn't probably till I was in the locker room that I realized, that the judges had just screwed me.
Yeah, that's a really tough situation. And you've been in a number of those split decisions before, haven't you? And were you feeling like especially more confident? Like, did you have any feeling at all that the judges might pull out a draw, or were you 100% confident that you had won that fight?
There was no question in my mind. I knew I won the fight. I knew that, as soon as it was over, like, I knew I won. You know what I mean? Everyone knew I won. Song knew I won. Song's corner knew I won. You know what I mean? Like, Song's corner, they were congratulating me, like, hey, man, really nice fight. You did a really good job. Congratulations. Song was broken. I mean, he wouldn't even – he laid on the canvas for 15, 20 seconds after the fight was over and just laid there and was shaking his head. He shook his head when they read a decision because he knew he didn't win. He knew he lost. I mean, that kind of tells the story in itself. Like, the guy's coaches, the guy himself, everyone in the crowd was booing. It was a weird one, but I mean, in the long run, it's not going to really make much of a difference.
Right. And in his last fight, which was pretty recent too, he was on the side of another controversial decision. Now, did you watch that fight, and what did you think the result was?
So that fight was a lot closer than the fight that Song Yadong and I had. Originally, I thought Marlon Vera won the fight. After watching it again, I've watched it like 3 or 4 times now, just because I knew I was going to be asked this question. I 100% think Song won that fight. I don't know why, when I initially watched it, that I thought Cheeto won, but after watching it, I think the refs made the right decision. I do think Song won the fight.
Now, after watching that fight, do you feel like you have more confidence going into a fight, say, with Cheeto Vera, like considering how Song did against him and how you did against Song?
Sure. I mean, but stylistically, everything is different, right? I mean, every single guy matches up with people differently. I mean, you can't do the MMA math. I beat Bryan Kelleher. Bryan Kelleher beat Aljamain Sterling, and then Aljamain Sterling beat me. That doesn't really make any sense. You would think that one of us would be the clear winner of all those fights, but it was all just a big mix-up. So it's more about matchups and preparedness. What happened in camp. Were you hurt? Did anything crazy like that happen? How well did you prepare? How hard did you work in preparation for a fight? So I think it's a fight-by-fight basis on a lot of those instances. But to be the absolute best in the world, I mean, you have to be so much better than everyone in every single aspect. So if you're a guy like Demetrius Johnson, to win that many times, you need to be so much better than everyone that, like, even on your bad night, you can still win.
Right. Now, it was recently announced that you're taking on the streaking Bryan Kelleher at UFC 250. Now, this fight will take place in an empty arena. Do you see this fight as, anything different than a fight with crowds? And what steps, if any, are you taking to adjust for the crazier circumstances?
I mean, we fight every day in the gym without a crowd. It doesn't make any difference. Once you start fighting, I don't think I've never noticed the crowd. I've never heard the crowd. I've never heard anyone outside of my corner saying anything. So, I mean, in my head, it doesn't make any difference whether there's a crowd there, whether there's not a crowd there. I still got to fight a guy in front of me. When someone's trying to punch you in the face, you don't really care about what people are saying in the stands.
Right. Now, you were originally supposed to fight in Columbus against Raoni Barcelos, if I'm correct,
Yep.
before that whole event got canceled due to the coronavirus. Now, how drastically different are the camps were for Barcelos and I guess the camp for Kelleher?
Well, I've been in fight camp since almost the beginning of the year. I've been preparing for a fight for 5 months almost. And I got to a point where I wasn't sure I was going to fight Barcelos. So I wasn't really preparing for anyone specific. Like once the fight, the 28th got canceled, I didn't think he'd be able to make it in the country. And I knew the UFC was going to start. So I wasn't preparing for him. I was just preparing myself for anyone. Bryan Kelleher is the guy that stepped up. So, now he's the guy that I got to beat up. I mean, and stylistically, I think Barcelos is on paper, he's a tougher fight. Kelleher probably is more well-known right now. So this couldn't have worked out any better for me. I mean, in my eyes, I'm fighting a guy that people think is, better than what I think he is. So I'm excited. Like this, I mean, everything laid out so nicely for me. I'm excited to go and beat up Bryan Kelleher.
Yeah, well, I'd be excited to watch that. Now, is it true that Kelleher was not your original opponent? Like for June 6th, you had a opponent before him lined up, like between Barcelos, right? Who was that supposed to be?
It's going to be Barcelos.
Oh, it's going to be Barcelos again.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, apparently he's hurt right now. So, Kelleher was the guy that stepped up. I was fighting Barcelos. I had gotten a contract for him, and I'm like the same day, they called me and told me he was hurt. So I didn't think I was fighting. I think I was going to be fighting later in June. And then maybe 2 days later, they sent me a list of names of guys, and I said I'd fight any of them. And Kelleher was the first one to say yes. So he was the guy. If
you can say, what were some of the other names on that list?
Dotson, Marab. I think that was it.
Nice. Yeah. And now, after the whole Barcelos fight got canceled again, I saw that you called out Uriah Faber on Instagram and on Twitter. Now, did that call out get any traction whatsoever?
Not from him, no. I think a lot of people did want to see it. I'm a ranked guy. The fight to me made sense because Uriah was weighing in at a fight a week before that, saying that he's still in the mix and he still wants to fight and he was ready to save the show. So I assumed when my opponent got hurt that he would step up and want to take the fight. I mean, because obviously it seemed like he was looking for a fight. But I think Uriah is looking for something different. I think he's looking for like some kind of super fight with someone where they have a lot of time to promote it, and he has plenty of time to prepare. I think that the whole weighing in and possibly fighting Cheeto, I think that was all just a publicity stunt. That was just something he did for attention, not something he was actually willing to do. I mean, obviously it was. If 2 days later I call him out and ask him if he wants to do this in June, and he says nothing, which means no. Obviously, he wasn't actually willing to get in there and fight.
Right. Now, Faber is Song Yadong's head coach at Team Alpha Male, I believe. Now, if you got that fight, would you take it a bit more personally to try to prove yourself against the coach of the guy that you believed you won and you were robbed from?
Yeah. I mean, but anybody I get in there with, I'm going to find a way to beat him, whether it's Faber or Song or anybody. There would be a little bit of there'd be an extra hype to that fight just because it's Uriah Faber. You know what I mean? People would see him as, one of the best guys to do it at the weight class. He's one of the guys that, I looked up to coming up. He was like the man when I started fighting. He was like the guy. He was the guy. And I respect him a lot as a person. I think he's a great dude. But as an athlete, I'm not a huge fan of some of the stuff, some of the antics, that he's been pulling lately. I don't like the attention grabs. You know what I mean? Like being retired, not being retired, being selective about your fights. That's not really how I used to see him. And I think he should just be black or white. Be in this game or be out of it. You can't have one foot in, one foot out, and kind of decide to be retired and you run out of money and need to fight again. Like he just needs to make a decision about what he's going to do.
Do you kind of feel that same way about Dominick Cruz, who came out of retirement after like a 4-year layoff? Well, I guess it really wasn't retirement, to fight for the title of your division.
Yeah, I mean that was another one of those weird situations. I mean, I enjoyed watching that fight against Dom and Henry Cejudo, but I definitely don't think Dom was the guy deserving of that shot. I think there were other guys that had been fighting recently that deserved it, but I understand why the UFC did it. I mean, that was a huge fight, and Henry Cejudo, I'm sure, was calling for Dominick Cruz too, knowing that he'd been out for a long time and knowing that that he might be able to play that to his advantage. So it made sense to me. I like the fight, but I definitely don't think Dominick is the dominant athlete he was, just because I think the game has changed. I think people are probably going to catch up. People have better footwork. They're more well-rounded. There's more killers in this division now. You got Jose Aldo, Frankie Edgar. You have all these, really, really, really tough guys popping in at bantamweight. And I think Dominick's going to find out that, when he was great, when he was the best, like that was his time. And now things have changed.
Yeah. And it was recently announced today that, Jose Aldo and Petr Yan are going to be fighting for the vacant bantamweight belt of this year. Now, do you have any thoughts on that with, Aldo getting a title fight off a loss and Yan getting a title fight off wins of like more profile names like Dodson, Rivera, and Uriah Faber, names that I don't really think should get you a title shot?
Well, I mean, I think it's more the way things went down. I think the way Jose Aldo, I mean, his fight with Marlon Moraes, I really could have went either way. I mean, I thought he won the fight. I thought he won that fight. I think the judges took that fight from him. And I also think that Dana White saw it as him winning. So I wouldn't really say Jose Aldo's coming off a loss. I'd say he just went out and beat the number one contender at 135. So I think he earned the title shot. I mean, you beat the number one guy, you're the next guy for the shot, right? And then Petr Yan has just been beating everyone in a way that's been so dominant. Like no one's really been able to touch the guy. And he's pretty much willing to fight anyone at any time. And I think the UFC really likes that too. So that fight makes sense to me. I'm really curious to see how these fights play out June 6th after I fight, the Cody Garbrandt fight and the Sun Tzu, and then Stan Hagan and Sterling. I mean, those are big fights for the division, and that's gonna really change, where everyone stands. I think there's going to be a more concrete idea of, who the best guy is at bantamweight after next weekend.
Right. And there's also the OMalley and Eddie Wineland fight, and OMalley's like this massive prospect. And you don't think so? You're not buying into the OMalley hype?
Who's he fought? Who's he fought that's ranked?
No one yet, but,
yeah.
He gets it done.
That's the thing, though. I mean, if I wasn't fighting top 15 guys, I could do things in a different way. When you're fighting the absolute best guys in the world, I mean, a lot of the flashy shit that OMalley does wouldn't work. I mean, he almost lost a fight against somebody who's been like 500 in the UFC. He had a really, really tough fight against Tyrion Ware, who I beat on 7 days' notice. I'm not buying the hype. And maybe OMalley is as good as everyone thinks he is, but you got to prove it. You know what I mean? To you, you might think he's great, but to an athlete, to me, I gotta see him in there with the best guy in the world before I decide like this guy's legit or not. Because everybody's great. Maybe he's great in the gym. Maybe he's great against lower level guys. But when you get in there with one of the guys that can take your shots and are giving it back and have better game plans and they're more well rounded, it'd be tough. I mean, I think OMalley would be in one of the easier fights in the UFC, honestly.
Well, that's very interesting, and that probably won't be a fight you're interested in because I know you want to fight like the top 15 guys, want to fight the best guys in the world, and there are a bunch of those guys in your division that are fighting on June 6th. Now, are there any matchups that are going on, like especially the Cody Garbrandt and Sancho fight and Sterling Sandhagen that you're putting extra eyes on to like watch for maybe future opponents?
Yeah, I'm watching that Garbrandt Sunset fight. I like that fight. I want to see how that plays out. I don't know. I mean, Sunsel's getting up there. I mean, he's been around a long time. He really got dominated against Sandhagen. I wonder if he still got it. And then Garbrandt, that guy steamrolled everybody all the way to the title, even Dominick Cruz. I mean, I thought for sure he was going to be the champ for a long time just based on his performances leading up to it. And I think he maybe stopped working as hard as he was, before that. And I'm wondering if he's got that fire back. That fight I'm really, really pinned on. And then the Sandhagen Sterling fight, I think is going to be awesome. I think that's going to be an awesome fight just because stylistically, they both fight really awkwardly. They're both good everywhere. Sterling's been absolutely murdering guys in the top 10 everywhere. So that's a really, really huge fight for bantamweight. 2 huge fights for the bantamweight division. Like I said before, we're gonna have a better idea like who the best guys are after this next weekend.
Right. Now, let's say you win at UFC 250, which is very highly likely in my opinion. Do you have a call out planned? Do you have like an opponent that you're planning to call out?
See, that's the thing. I'm gonna fight before those guys, and then the Garbrandt and Sunsao. So I got to see how everything plays out. You know what I mean? Like, I'd still like to fight Uriah Faber if, he gets off the stool and decides he wants to take it up again. I would definitely entertain that fight. But outside of that, I don't think there's a guy outside of the top 10 that I'm really, really eyeballing. I'd be interested to see who's available. You know what I mean? To see who's available for, I'd like to fight again, providing I'm not injured. I'd like to fight again soon. You know what I mean? I've trained for 5 months. I'm in great shape. My weight is great. Everything's been going exactly the way I'd want it to. So, I'd like to keep the ball rolling. I want to fight and fight and fight and fight because I feel like I'm my best when I'm competing a lot. And, God willing, everything goes exactly the way I see it's going to go against Bryan Kelleher. I think I'll get out of that fight without a scratch. And then, maybe I'll call out one of these top 10 guys.
Right. So you're like kind of eyeing like one of the Garbrandt and the Sunshine fights is like your next opponent. Those are like the options that look really good to you.
Yeah, that option also that looks great. Who knows if I'm, one of those guys is whoever wins that fight is going to be wanting a title shot. So they're not going to want to fight the number 12 guy. So that might be a stretch. I might be able to get like a Jimmy Rivera or something. Someone else that's in the top 10 that, that could be a potential opponent. But, we'll see. We'll see how everything plays out. We'll see what the UFC wants. I believe that being ranked, I'm always 2 or 3 fights away from a title shot. And, everybody's tough and I want to make money. So if it's a top 5 guy, a top 10 guy, top 15 guy, or someone that is just known well in MMA, I'm willing to fight anyone. I don't really care. I'm at a point where I think I can beat anybody. So just sign the check and I'll fight anybody they want.
Now, like one of Kelleher's major like selling points and like the thing that people say he's best at is his punching power. Now, I assume that you're not really worried about that. You think you fought guys with power comparable to his? Like you have no way to gauge that, but do you think you have?
Yeah, I mean, listen, Kelleher, he's done well. I feel like he's done really, really well. But he's fought a lot of guys that I don't think were that spectacular, and he hasn't put any of those guys out. I think his best weapon is his guillotine. I think his Harmon guillotine is his best. That's the best thing that he has. I think that's his thing. I think that's what he's thinking is going to happen with me. I think he's thinking I'm going to shoot and get my head caught, and it's going to be an easy night for him. But on his feet, I wasn't really impressed with anything he did. I wasn't impressed with either one of his last 2 wins. He fought a debut guy after, losing to 2 guys that, I think every single guy that Bryan Kelleher has beat is very beatable. You know what I mean? Like, I'm seeing the guys that are beating him, and the way he's fighting, I thought he was losing to that Hunter Azur kid, and I think that Hunter Azur kid's still really, really green. So, I mean, based on that, that was like, what, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago? Like, if that Bryan Kelleher shows up June 6th, I'm going to murder him. You know what I mean? I'm going to murder him. I'm a different athlete than Hunter Azur. You know what I mean? I've fought the who's who of MMA. You're talking about a guy that just popped in the show and hasn't fought anyone. So, whatever hype Bryan Kelleher has, I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit about anything or anyone he's fought. I've fought all these hyped up dudes forever. I beat these guys. Song Yadong was unbeatable. He was going to kill everyone all the way to the title. I beat him. Tom Duquesnoy, another guy. Everyone thought he was like the greatest thing since sliced bread. I whooped that kid. And, Bryan Caraway, another, guy that's been around. Shit, he was fighting when I was in middle school. I beat him. The only guy I've ever lost to was Aljamain Sterling. And that was a fight that, that was my third or fourth UFC fight. And that was like his 11th or 12th. I was still pretty green in the UFC game. So, to me, I look like I'm just coming to the top of the hill in my athletic career. Like I've just kind of come into my own. I'm starting to be a complete athlete. I'm starting to put things together. I think it's going to show June 6th. I don't think Bryan Kelleher stands a fucking chance of doing anything to me. And I think I'm absolutely going to cream the guy.
Well, I'm very excited for that fight. Now I want to take a little bit of a departure here, just something a little bit more light. Now, many fighters and people in general get tattoos that have meaning to them. Now, you have some pretty cool ones, such as the black bar on your arm and the Greek lettering on your shoulder. Could you tell us what those mean?
The OMalley, the literal translation is like "come and take." It's from Greek mythology, but it basically means like "come and get some." And it's a Spartan thing. That's why I got it. My brother and I both have it. The band on my arm is a family thing, and that's like a tattoo that just never got finished. Like I got the band and I was gonna get a bunch of other stuff with it, and then I just never did it. I never went back and did it. I don't even like tattoos. I don't like getting tattooed that much. I mean, if anything, I want to get rid of them all. I'd keep them all alive, but the rest of them I get rid of. I mean, and then, after I get rid of the band on my arm, I'll tell Bryan Kelleher where I went. So hopefully he can get rid of some of his tattoos.
Yeah, those are not great. Now, oh yeah, it's just terrible. And there's just a lot of bad tattoos in MMA, and yours are actually pretty good. So, I'm gonna move on here. For the majority of the fights in your career, you have fought pretty close to home in Michigan and Indiana. But for your third pro fight at Local Combat New Beginnings, you fought in Craiova, Romania, I'm pretty sure. Now, how did this fight come to place, like fighting from Michigan to Romania? And what were the biggest differences you noticed when fighting in the U.S. and fighting all the way in another country?
I mean, everything happened pretty fast. So I needed a fight to qualify for the Ultimate Fighter. And so basically took a short notice fight. And that was the only one available. I went over there. I was there for 3 days. Went there, came back, really didn't see anything. It was a quick trip. I mean, nothing really happened besides, knocking a dude out and then driving home. That was it, flying home. I mean, it was a quick trip, something that I needed to qualify for the Ultimate Fighter that I got kicked out of in the first round. So I traveled a long way for nothing.
Yeah. Well, it worked out in the long run, right?
Yeah, it did.
So you made your UFC debut at a pretty large pay-per-view event, UFC 213 Romero versus Whitaker. Now, did the weight of the event and the size of the crowd add any extra pressure to you on the fight, or did it give you extra motivation? And how did you see either of those things reflect in your performance in the fight against Tyrion Ware?
Well, I mean, that was like one of those fights where I wasn't healthy. I didn't have any time to prepare. Everything happened in about 5 days. I was 1 minute I was working for my family business, and then I get a phone call says, "Hey, you're fighting in the UFC next weekend." I'm like, all right, shit. I drove straight to the gym, got a workout in, kind of see where I was at, and I was not in great shape. So I didn't even really have time to think about like what was happening. Think about like fighting in the UFC and like all these things. I mean, it was a pretty surreal moment for me. I didn't have time to get nervous about anybody else fighting. I just had, basically 4 days to get a bunch of medicals done, get a bunch of paperwork signed, and get to Las Vegas and get in a fight with a guy I really hadn't even seen fight. So that was just the whole thing was a whirlwind. And when I look back at it, it's maybe better that it happened that way. I didn't have time to get nervous or even consider what was actually happening in my life. It was just like one minute I was one guy, and the next minute I was a UFC fighter.
Right. Now, in that fight, you got 8 takedowns, which is a really high amount. Now, did you, like, when in the fight did you notice that I can take this guy down basically like at will? And was that really your game plan going into the fight?
I didn't have a game plan. Like I said, I didn't really have time to think of what the hell I was going to do. I noticed it at the weight. I just looked at skinny ass legs and knew that there's no way this guy was going to be able to stop me. So I knew right then, I'm like, dude, I'm going to be able to take this guy down. And honestly, I was taking him down so fat and out of shape that I couldn't stand on my feet for that long and fight. So I was just taking him down to survive. And then catch my breath, and then I'd let him up, and then I'd beat on him a little more and take him down, catch my breath. Like, that was pretty much how that went in my eyes.
Yeah. Now, after your first loss in your career, you went on a 10-fight winning streak, which carried far into your UFC tenure so far. What things did you learn in that loss, if any, that helped you turn around and go on that amazing winning streak?
I wouldn't consider that to be a loss. That was another fight, maybe even worse than the Song Yadong fight. I thought I obviously won. My corner, everyone thought I obviously won. And that was a situation where I got a really shitty split decision. And it set me back a lot in my fighting career. It'd be a whole lot different if I was 15-0 going into the UFC, but 14-1 didn't quite have the same appeal. That fight, that was another fight where I feel like I really got screwed. In my eye, I'm 20-1 as a MMA fighter, and I probably have one of the best records and one of the highest winning percentages of anyone in the UFC or in the world for that matter. So, like, what I learned is don't let shit judges judge your fights. And then I forgot that lesson when I fought Song Yadong in DC, where there's never any fights. So those are hard lessons, and that shit happens in MMA, and it can change a lot of stuff. I mean, I think that it's kind of on the brass on the UFC and on the athletic commissions to get their shit together and figure out a way that they can make things better for the athletes, more fair.
Right. So now would you say you're kind of, I don't know, distrustful of judges? Like, are you feeling like less safe leaving your fights in their hands? Are you going to try to like finish them faster?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think everybody sees that. I mean, any fan of any fight, like, there's been so many fights probably in the last year that I thought one person clearly won, and then gets the decision. It all just happened. And I think it takes a little bit away from fighting. It's not the UFC's fault. It's not the fighter's fault, because fights can be close. Two guys can be evenly matched. Everyone thinks they're like, oh, well, why didn't you finish him? I'm like, well, dude, if I could walk out and just punch everyone one time and the shit could be over, like, I would do that every time, obviously, you know what I mean? But that's not how it goes. Like, these guys are tough. They don't just fall down. I think it's the athletic commissions need stricter standards for people to become judges. You have people that really don't even know the sport of MMA that well that are judging. And it's just not fair. You were talking about, like, real money. You're talking about, people's livelihoods, and you're leaving in the hands of people that just aren't qualified for the job. Like I said, that's no one's fault but the athletic commissions. And also, like, retired fighters should start applying for judging licenses. Who better to judge a fight than someone who's fought and understands what the hell is going on? So I think, something has to happen, and, there's no clear solution to this problem, but it's definitely a problem that needs to get solved before, people kind of lose faith in the sport.
So someday, like, after your career is ending, do you think, like, becoming an MMA judge, like, to, like, I don't know, right the wrongs that have been done to you would be something you're interested in?
Absolutely, I would. Absolutely, I would. And I would never want to judge anyone that I knew. I don't want to be completely unbiased and 100% honest, because I know what it is. I know what athletes go through. This shit isn't easy, and people people, love criticizing fighters for this and that. Like, suck, you this, and this is a hard life, and it takes a lot to do this. You're talking about guys that are getting locked in a cage, and like trying to kill each other. Like, these aren't like soft of heart men. Guys that we're fighting are absolute killers, trained killers too. And I absolutely would want to, be a judge just to give back and make sure that, the right guy wins the fight.
Well, unfortunately, I think those are all the questions that I have today. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. Is there anything you want to say to the people out there?
June 6th, tune into me, whooping the shit out of that ugly Bryan Kelleher or whatever the fuck his name is.
Again, well, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you to everyone watching this right now. I've been Zach Harkness with the MMA Island, and I will see you all in the next one.